And greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there. I'm continuing my trek through the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond. We're now at the end of Season 5. 5 down, 4 to go. Over the halfway point, so here we go. This, of course, is the second to last of the flashback episodes, and it is Allie's birth. So as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, we don't jump further back in time than where we already have been, but we go to a point in the midpoint. And so far, the furthest back in time we've gone is how Ray and Deborah met at the end of Season 3. Season 4, we skipped ahead a little bit further in time to when they're across the street from their parents and Robert's about to get divorced. Here, we jump back to a little bit before the Season 1 flashback, where Ray and Deborah are at the apartment, but it's before they become a big family. Just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, both the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. You join the Patreon, you'll gain access to videos early, and you'll be able to suggest the topics for future videos. If you just want to do a one-off support or a one-off request, go the PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated. Now, this is a Tucker Collie episode, and I've said many times in the past, and probably will continue to say in the future, Mr. Collie has a good grasp of our characters, especially by this point in the show. He's able to capture the dynamics, even if they're only in one scene fully together. You're able to really believe them as a family. And he doesn't really make that many characters from a character perspective, because when I mean that, I mean say something that kind of clashes with something that was said before, or a minor error. That seems to be something from the writers that hardly write any episodes, or might come in for a little bit and leave, or like the outside writers that they're contractually obligated to bling in. Can you imagine Frank getting them with all the bling? To bring in, if I can actually talk here. But Tucker, he's one of the ones that has a good grasp of them, along with Ray, Phil, whenever he writes ones, when they write ones together. And this one's no exception. Now the setup for this episode is that Ray has to take Allie to a father-daughter dance. Now, Ray being Ray, he doesn't want to do it. He's like, why can't you take her to it? It's a father-daughter dance. Although I'm certain that there are some single mothers out there that have to be both the father and the mother that would probably take their daughters to a father-daughter dance if need be. I'm sure there's even same-sex couples that would do that, or what any other type of thing you want to plug in there. But for this, yes, Ray, is a father-daughter dance. Get up off your butt and do it. It's another example of Ray wanting to try to skip it because it's not fun. And of course, it's dancing, something he hates. Now, this opening scene is cut out in the syndicated version. That I do remember, because I think I saw this episode at least once in syndication before I got the DVD. So seeing that, I'm like, oh, that's new. But it's the scene that it sets up the fact that, Ray has to take Allie to the father-daughter dance. He doesn't want to, so it's Ray being Ray. In syndication, you can understand why it's cut, because it's funny, sets it up, but you kind of get the setup right away when it cuts to the follow-up scene, where it's Ray and Allie actually at the dance. And I like how it's Ray reminiscing on it as he's watching his daughter dance. It's a nice little flashback there where he realizes, yeah, time's flying by. As a parent, there's always a moment in your life where as your kids grow up, that's what you're going to realize. You're like, yeah, time's flying by. And start reminiscing on it. Here, that's where it hits Ray. And he flashes back to when him and Deborah were still living in that apartment. They had been married for a while, but they had not had children yet. Now, we can still see that Ray's still Ray, Deborah's still Deborah, but we can see these are more proto versions of the characters that we see now. Not as proto as they were in the Season 3 flashback. There you can still see the bits of the characters, but you can also see why their little dynamic that they have at the current point in the show where it's formed. Here you still get that, but they're a little bit closer to their final forms than they are when we saw them in those flashbacks. Deborah, you see she's a bit happier to a point. I mean, she's still happy in the present time, but you can see she's still in that early part of the marriage happiness, no children and all that, so where it's more just the two of them. She's really gung-ho about getting pregnant. Ray has a conversation with her, which is like, I'm starting to feel like a piece of meat, which I know a lot of guys would probably be going, really? Why would you be feeling like a piece of meat? Well, it's because they've been having sex every day. Which it's funny to hear Ray talk about that, considering it's like, if they were having sex every day in the modern time, I think he would not be complaining. Am I right? Ray would not be complaining at all. He'd be like, woohoo. But back then, the early part of the marriage where you get that a little bit more, especially when you're actively trying for a baby, yeah. Of course, with Ray, part of it is that he's starting to get a little bit of that family nudge guilt, mainly from Frank, because as Frank puts it, the Barone men are very virile. If you guys have been trying for 3 months, you should have impregnated her by now. That's not the phrase he uses, but I think you get the gist of what Frank probably says. So Ray's starting to feel a little I don't know if I'm trying to figure out the way to actually phrase this. I think it'd be, his masculinity feels a little challenged by this point. That he, by now he should have, which we all know in science, once is enough. So he's probably thinking with that knowledge, our men are very virile, so what's going on? And then Deborah points out, my gynecologist says it might take a while for me to, because I guess how her eggs are, how her whole inner workings are. They don't fully go into it. They just loosey-goosey talk about it, because, early 2000s sitcom, you can't really get that in-depth with it in the terminology without someone probably going, they said that on TV? Oh my God, I cannot believe that they said that word on TV. Think about the children, oh God. Now, while they're having this conversation, Deborah does get a bit angry because the way that Ray is talking about it, he kind of comes across like maybe he doesn't want kids after all, even though they talked about it. But it's more like, do we really have to have them now? Because with how often they're procreating and going through everything, he makes it, to him it feels like Deborah's really gung-ho about it and that she really wants to do that at the expense of everything else. That's not how Ray puts it, but that's where you can get with what he's saying, is that she's really getting on it and he's feeling like he's just a horse there to be ridden. And Deborah gets offended, like, I can't believe you're telling me this now. Which I do get, because if Ray, let's just say Ray had changed his mind about kids, or was like, really, we really need to put this on the back burner, that's probably a conversation you should have before you start doing this. Like, the change of mind about kids one is definitely a conversation you should have before you put a ring on it. Like, when they were in the talks in the season 2 flashback, if he didn't want kids anymore, that's when he should have had that conversation, or when they were talking about it with Father Hovley, all that should have been when they brought up the no kids. And, if it's something that's a big compatibility thing, that's when it goes separate ways. I'm sure if you guys have been online for any length of time, you could see, there's dozens of Reddit stories about couples that separate or try to change the mind of the other partner, even though they knew the stance. That is usually where the female is usually child-free, the male says they are, and then they turn around and go it. I know someone's probably going to be a smart ass and say, what about you? Well, me, if it happens, it happens if I'm with the right person and all that. But the person I happen to end up together with at the end of everything is child-free, then, there are worse things of not having any children. And, of course, there's one less likely of having to deal with. That's what I'm going to say about it. Now, we jump ahead, and Deborah is now pregnant. So Ray has done his work, as Frank would put it. Now, this whole scene is Deborah trying to find a way to tell Ray. And she wants to tell Ray in her way. But, of course, since the rest of the family has shown up before Ray, and they all find out the news before it, because Marie somehow could figure it out with her maternal instincts tingling, they tell it to everybody else. Of course, you see everybody else different. Ray, Robert, different hair and all that. Frank and Marie, not a big difference. And, some of the dialogue, hinting like, oh, how things were different back then. Oh, how Deborah was so naive. And Marie trying to butt in like, oh, how is Deborah feeling? You should ask her, Ray. Really? So what happens is that eventually Deborah has to take Ray into another room and hold the door and try to tell Ray. And then when she finally tells her, Deborah finally then said Ray's happy. But then Marie, Deborah's pregnant. It's like, Marie, you really have to stick your nose into this. Finding out that she's pregnant is something that Deborah should tell Ray on her own, in her own way. You don't need to stick your big nose into it like you do with everything else. But of course, this is early on. Deborah still hasn't gotten her shiny spine together as she will in other episodes. I mean, there's multiple episodes where she does show how shiny her spine is, and at the end of this coming season, there's actually going to be a multi-episode arc leading into season 7 where we're really going to see how shiny Deborah's spine can be. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be a fun one, because it's going to be one of the few times in this show where there's a lot of continuity between episodes, and we actually see a semi-serialized format, so that one should be fun, especially with how that one leads into the season 1 opener. Hashtag he's in a cult. We jump ahead in time where Deborah's in her pregnancy. Now, for Patricia Heaton, I believe she had her final kid by this point, so out of all the times she appears pregnant in the show, I believe this is the only time where it actually is a fat suit. Because, with season 1, it's like, hey, she's pregnant. Hey, we can use that. Let's do a flashback. Season 3, they didn't really use it. So for the time she was pregnant, they had to do the old hide it with the camera angles and cover it with the stuff. And it only shows up in the blooper reels like that one. That's what blah, blah, blah told me. That's not what he told me. Stuff like that. Here, looks like they went the old traditional route. And now, at this point in their pregnancy, Deborah is really starting to see how annoying and overbearing Marie can be when she is trying to do well. Now, some people will take that well, but as we can see with Deborah, she's not enjoying it. And thankfully, they still live in the apartment, so they only have to deal with Marie in small doses, even when she and Frank have to make the drive to them, or they have to go to their house. So it's not like in the current situation where they could just come across the street, which I think by that point, Deborah probably would have committed homicide by this point in the pregnancy, and we would not blame her. I think even Robert's workers would be like, what's going on, Officer Barone? I think it's justifiable homicide, Sarge. Oh yeah, it seems that way to me too. Oh, they're all talking there. Seems like a normal day, and Deborah's water breaks. Now, they don't want Marie to know, because with everything, Deborah does not want Marie in there. And all I'm going to say about how they get her not to go, because I don't want to spoil this little joke, is that Frank takes one for the team. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you, Frank. You took one for the team. They end up stuck in traffic. And this leads to a moment that is in the season 6 one, so depending on how I decide to do that best of season 6 one at the beginning or the end, it might be that you might be seeing me talk about it again next week, or you might see me talking about it in like weeks down the line. So by the time this video is live, you'll already know, because I'll probably have it recorded, but just to keep that in mind. Where they're stuck in traffic, Deborah thinks the pregnancy's coming, and since as a police officer, Robert has had emergency training for it, he goes and he's going to try and deliver the baby. And of course this annoys Ray, because like, this is against God, thou shalt not look at that brother's wife there. It's like, Ray, I kind of get how that would be a little annoying and kind of a little awkward given the situation, but it's a medical emergency. Would you be complaining if he had to remove her shirt for someone else to put an AED or something? No, you wouldn't, because it's for a medical purpose. He's looking at her down there for a medical purpose because she's starting to go into labor. But of course, she's not quite yet. As Robert puts it, she's not set to pop. Because I guess the baby's not crowning yet, doesn't see a head. So thankfully, they do manage to get Deborah to a hospital where she gives birth, and there's Allie. And everybody is all excited and happy. Marie in her own way, give her to me. Oh, there it is. They bring up the Fountain of Youth joke again. And that's where our flashback ends, and it goes back to Ray. Now, the next song is going to be a slow song, and it's the song Sunshine of My Life by Stevie Wonder. Now, this song was brought up earlier because it's part of Deborah's relaxation music, which it's been a while since I've been around anybody in a personal capacity who's been pregnant. I mean, I've had family members who have been pregnant, but I've never been around them. It's been more adjacent. Last one that I could think of was probably my mother when she was pregnant with Kyle. Because I really wasn't around my sister-in-law when she was pregnant with my niece and nephew. I mean, it was like adjacent, and I saw her after the births. But so I don't know how she was when it comes to needing relaxation and all that. And I don't really remember my mother being like that. But I can see, given the fact that you're growing another person inside you, and also the whole thing with how hormones change during pregnancy. And then, of course, right there, she's beginning to go into labor. I could see a pregnant woman needing relaxation music. And it's a nice choice of one. And the fact that they decided to tie it together by having it be a song that's played at the father-daughter dance as a slow song Nice little thing there. And it's a nice little song to end the episode with, and it's a nice song for a father and daughter to slow dance together with at a father-daughter dance. And to tie it all in with this part, even though we know Ray's not a big fan of dancing, and Allie, she's 9, she's smart. She's no Dunsky. She picks up on that. And she's like, yeah, we can go. I know you don't like the slow songs. And he's like, no. And I love this line that Ray says before him and Allie begin dancing and the camera pans back. It's moving fast enough. Like I said earlier, that whole thing about him realizing how time is going. Yeah, it's like he's realizing Allie's growing up. Soon she won't be his little girl anymore, physically. But she'll always be the little girl to him, and he'll always be her dad. And this nice moment of him dancing with her as the episode ends. It's one of those moments you're watching it and you're like, hey, who's leaving these bowl of onions here? Will you go away? It's a nice little moment to end the episode, and I liked it. They could have easily turned in that last bit into a joke, but it gets a little sentimental here. Like I said previous times, it's like shows, sitcoms, they can be funny, but when they decide to either make a statement or actually be sentimental, they can do it. And here, they do a good job. And part of the reason is Tucker Cawley, like I mentioned, but the other half is the actors. Like Ray Romano, he plays the sentimental Ray here perfectly. We know he plays funny Ray perfectly because as a comedian, part of it goes into there. Especially in season 1 when they work some of his comedic material into it. It's easy for him to adapt it. Here, perfect. And it's the perfect episode to end season 5 with. And it's family-centric, even though it's more about Allie's birth and how everyone reacts to it. I want you to keep that in mind, because thematically, when we get to season 6, episode 1, that's going to continue. But of course, that's going to go with more from a sentimental moment to a dysfunctional moment, which is going to have one of my favorite little Deborah rants. So keep that in mind when we get to that one, whether it's next week or 2 weeks from now, depending on how I did it. But season 6. Now, before we get into that, since this is the end of season 5 as tradition, I got to give my little breakdown of season 5. Like I mentioned, if you want to say where the golden era of the show is, it's from season 3 to season 5. You could work it into season 6, but if you got to really pinpoint it, this is the last season of the golden era. And like I said, most of these episodes are ones that I would love. Like, there's 25 episodes, so let me see how many of these would be skippable real quick. Just looking at them, most of these ones I can't really see myself skipping. I mean, if you really want to skip it because it's in the mood one, Young Girl, you could say Humvack, Let's Fix Robert. But most of these episodes are ones you can watch. But if I had to narrow it down to 6 episodes from this season to watch, since I'm doing it, I'm counting Italy as one. But that's not going to be on there. That'd be too easy. I'm going to go with Wallpaper. Of course, here, Allie's birth. Frank Paints the House. Ray's Journal. Fighting In-Laws. And Pet Cemetery. Those are the 6 that I would recommend you show anyone. And those ones are definitely going to be on the VHS list, but I'm going to have to really narrow it down to decide how many episodes I'll put in a VHS list in order. But that's the end of season 5, so our last little look at the DVD box set. And next time you see a box set, it's going to be yellow and in my hand. Till next time, guys.